Hello, everyone. We've just had the union budget, and for the first time, the union budget came out with a clear plan on enhanced expenditure on capital expenditure. 45% of the fiscal deficit is actually towards capital expenditure, which is a huge directional shift as far as the budget making process and the way expenditure mix is designed. This has been considered as a major important factor in determining the pace of growth and accelerating it further. The infrastructure pipeline which the government has had is an ambitious infrastructure pipeline, and the hope has been that this infrastructure pipeline, the spending on that will have a ripple effect and will incentivize the private also to invest more and will lead to job creations and thereafter. There are, of course, questions in terms of how this will be executed. How do we make sure that the spending is truly towards assets that are revenue generating, growth enhancing, and not just prestigious projects, which actually may be good on paper, but actually not really growth enhancing. So to understand this and to see the road ahead on the infrastructure journey, we have here an infrastructure expert, Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee. He has been a veteran in this space. He's seen and studied this space and played an important role, advised many governments on this. And he's also the chairman of the National Council on Infrastructure of the Confederation of Indian Industry. So thank you so much, Mr. Chatterjee, for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're happy that you're able to share your time on this. May I begin by first getting your overall thoughts on what you made of what was there in the budget this time, especially seen from the lens of infrastructure?
Okay, so I will first see it from the lens of macroeconomics and I will relate you to infrastructure there. Let us step back and understand the political economy pressure on the government and on the finance minister. You are coming out of a very stressed pandemic year, and all the voices around you are saying, do something to revive growth. Do something to revive growth. What do you do to revive growth? Economists broadly fall under two broad ends of a spectrum. And I'm using the word spectrum clearly because it is a spectrum. On the one hand are economists who would argue that the best way to revive demand in the economy is put money in the hands of consumers directly, right? So that, and how do you do this? You do that by reducing personal taxes. You achieve this by reducing taxes on goods like GST. You do direct benefit transfers. You do subsidies. That is the package that puts more money, disposable income in the hands of the population. So that is one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is purely Keynesian, which argues that the best way to revive the economy is to do very large public works programs by public expenditure and thereby unleash a variety of positive forces, including increasing jobs, creating demand for intermediate services and goods to build those infrastructures, and finally also then benefiting by creating lasting capital assets for the economy. Right? Now, these are the two ends of the spectrum. What often happens in public policy is that you get a mishmash of a little here and a little there. So I give out of a budget allocation of 100, I put 40 into this side of the spectrum and I put 60 on that side of the spectrum, and I say, chalo, I've taken care of. Now, very interestingly, as you rightly started off by saying, the pattern of expenditure which I have been studying at least for the last 3 years corroborates what you're saying. It is very clear from the allocations of one end of the spectrum, which have been either stable or muted, versus a massive 35% increase in infrastructure. It is very clear that the government has chosen the path of large public works to kickstart the economy. And I was looking at the figures. If you see the infra outlay of the budget in 2014-15, the first year of the NDA government, it was 1.97 lakh crores. 8 years later, it is 7.5 lakh crores. It is quadrupled. 2 lakh crores has become 8 lakh crores. You have quadrupled the outlay on public works. that's a very important signal of direction, political economy direction of this government. What I'm reading out has got published in the Financial Express today. The increase in infrastructure outlay, this is not the first time that there's been a large outlay. But in the past, it has been, if I start from 2015-16, it has been 28% increase, 13% increase, 8% decrease, 44% increase, 11% decrease. So the pattern in the past has been a little erratic. High outlays in one year, followed by negative outlays in the succeeding year, which shows a certain degree of prevarication on which end of the spectrum am I handling for economic revival. But the last 3 years very clearly have been 30% increase, 26% increase, and now 35% increase. So we are getting more and more clarity of the political thinking, which says, guys, India is following the path of large public works program. There is no two ways about this.
In today's context, when we take this point of the Keynesian multiplier approach, in today's scenario, the assumptions and the realities when during the Keynesian multiplier scenario and today's things have changed a lot. So compared to, do you think that is what we need to rely on? And considering that in the last 3 years when we have done this also, the growth has really not been significant. I mean, we've had, even pre-pandemic, the growth rate was not very high. I mean, we used to have the big problem used to be entered the pandemic with comorbidities of the economy of low consumption, low growth.
We are now treading on some very difficult economic terrain, and therefore the reason for the poor growth in the mid portion of this decade was largely a fallout of from 2013-14 onwards, the last 1 or 2 years of the UPA downwards, was a certain collapse of investment. The collapse of investment was led largely by what the Arvind Subramaniam, the erstwhile chief economic advisor, called the twin balance sheet problem. That a very rapid phase of growth from 2007 to 2012 brought with it in its wake very severe problems called the twin balance sheet problem, which led to private sector pulling back from any investments because of the very, very difficult nature of managing and surviving in PPP frameworks, and the banks being loaded with, shall we say, huge burden of NPAs. And finally, what was also called, if you remember in those days, decision paralysis, where a particular committee had to be set up called the PMG, Project Management Group, under the dynamic IS officer, Mr. Anil Swarup, to unstick some 17 lakh crores of stuck projects. So the reason for the collapse of the economy was largely due to the collapse of investment. It is not that consumers suddenly stopped buying. It was not a collapse of consumer demand as we have seen post-pandemic. It was a collapse of investment demand. Now, so therefore we come back to your earlier question that if it is a collapse of investment demand, and if there is a complete lack of confidence in the private sector to invest once again in thermal power plants or metro projects, like you've seen the problem in Hyderabad Metro, etc., or in electricity distribution, a huge number of problems when the private sector board said, we are not going to touch PPP anymore in terms of putting money from our balance sheet. We will become thekedars only, and we will execute government projects. So the NDA government understood this. And therefore, in a situation where you are not faced with declining consumer demand, which if you see the balance sheets of FMCG companies like ITC and Lever, that period did not have a drop in consumption demand, but you are faced with a significant drop of investment demand. Now, when you have that situation, what do? I personally think that the government did the right thing by gradually, in the last 4 or 5 years, focusing on public works, infra, and we are coming back to the same point. And this entire discussion is to answer your question to say, would economists have said there was an alternative path? What would you have done? Would there have been any sense in just giving direct benefit transfers in Jan Dhan accounts to revive the economy? That would have got spent on recurring loans or in savings or whatever it is. So the strategy is correct. And the Keynesian model has not outlived its utility. For example, 100 rupee expenditure on public works infrastructure leads to commensurate returns in how many ways? First, infrastructure is construction intensive, and construction intensity is very high on employment orientation, far higher than manufacturing. Today in manufacturing, with a high capitalization and robotics and all that, 1 rupee of capital expenditure in a factory does not get you the same employment as 1 rupee in infrastructure, right? So it is universally acknowledged that 100 rupees spent on infrastructure leads to very rapid employment generation, not just in the towns and cities, because this infrastructure is spread across Bharat. From roads to power plants, hydro in the northeast, to border roads, to Nal Se Jal, this is spread across Bharat. So jobs are created in hinterland India. Two, it creates demand for a variety of intermediate supplies. Steel, cement, cables, water pipes, steel pipes, PVC pipes, pumps for water pumping, distributors, insulators, transformers, across the various infrastructure spaces. It creates a natural demand for all kinds of intermediate goods and supplies, including the service sector, consulting, engineering, project management, etc. Finally, because of the distribution of wages, the same consumers go back home and start demanding consumer FMCG products and durables products. That creates its own engine then of reviving demand. So when you see the spectrum of all these benefits, I think it is amply clear that if somebody has a better strategy than this, please suggest it.
Since you said an alternate strategy, the thought which has been said about I spoke to a few before talking to actually, and the sense which I was getting was that they were talking of areas where market fails, where we need state interventions.
Basically, the argument says direct public expenditure to the areas where private capital will not go, where state is required to spend, exactly. Which is education, healthcare, some areas of irrigation, etc., etc. Now, obviously one cannot argue with that, but there is a context. The context is this: you are assuming that private capital is very happy to get into the other areas like roads and power and Nal Se Jal. But the fact is that the PPP framework has collapsed. There is no confidence in the PPP framework. So private capital is not even going there in those high multiplier effects. What do you do then?
And why has that confidence collapsed for our readers?
Because the PPP frameworks were not appropriately designed. Now millions of PhDs have been done, and the final verdict on this is a beautifully written report called the Kelkar Committee Report, which was instituted by this very government in 2015. Dr. Kelkar collected a bunch of very eminent infrastructure specialists and came up with the reasons for PPP failure and their rectification. But the top points on why PPP failed was: one, the risk allocation was completely wrong. It was weighted in favor of the public space with and completely, shall we say, unbalanced vis-a-vis private sector interests. There was no level playing field, there was no independent regulation, and there were no solutions for renegotiating projects, whereas the World Bank report has said that 63% of projects come up for renegotiation in the first 3 years. So the PPP frameworks were now proven to be inappropriate, right? Whereas there were many people with in the planning commission at that point of time, let me not take names, you know them, I know them, who rigidly stuck to the point that the PPP frameworks were brilliant and nothing needed to be tweaked till that bomb exploded. So even now it has not been reset, by the way. In fact, this government recognized that PPP frameworks had ceased to inspire interest in domestic and foreign investors, which is why domestic and foreign investors either became EPC contractors, ठेकेदार्स, or they were only invested in risk-free operating assets, like the Canadian pension funds. But let me not digress. This government recognized that PPP frameworks had required significant resetting. So what did it do? Very interestingly, people have forgotten that in his maiden budget of July 2014, Mr. Jaitley set aside 500 crores to create a new institution called 3P India. Read Mr. Jaitley's budget speech of July 2014. He was a wise man and he was wisely advised. that a massive institution with very strong intellectual capacities and credentials needed to rework the PPP framework for this country. And that budget carried this recommendation. But nothing happened. Radio silence after that. Till this budget, I was very happy to see that in this budget speech, Madam Sitaraman in her budget speech acknowledged the need to review PPP frameworks. And I will read for you what she said in the budget. Open inverted commas. Measures will be taken to enhance financial viability of projects, including PPP, with technical and knowledge assistance from multilateral agencies. Enhancing financial viability shall also be obtained by adopting global best practices, innovative ways of financing, and most importantly, balancing the risk allocation. This is the FM herself. So unless we are able to now get up and do this, private capital will not come back to even areas which are traditionally people believe welcome private capital. They will not come in.
From the situation that we are in today, if the PPPs have to be reset and in the 12-month time period, the projects have to see the light of day, and the execution, some sense that you can give in terms of what is the picture you get in terms of how will we go ahead with this execution? What are you happy about, and what are your concerns over the next 12 months?
Okay, I will first make my last point on PPP, which is one of the interesting parts of the budget speech was there was no mention or discussion amongst analysts, media on the national monetization pipeline. People spoke at length about meeting or not meeting the disinvestment target and why it is reduced to 66,000 crores. People forgot about a major scheme called NMP, National Monetization Pipeline, which has a target of 6 lakh crores for the next 5 years, which means every year it has a target of 1.5 lakh crores, which is almost 3 times the disinvestment target. The important point is, what does the NMP rest on? NMP is not about disinvestment. It is not about asset sale. NMP fundamentally rests on monetizing and operating project by handing out a long-term concession period. What is a long-term concession period other than a PPP? So you've got a major program, 6 lakh crores NMP, resting on revitalizing the PPP format, right? So people like you who address this issue, please raise your voice, because funnily in the budget debate, I don't hear any voice speaking about how far we are gone or how far we have achieved the NMP targets. So that's one. Now you're asking me about execution. It is now time to look at execution. Why do I say it? I say it because I'm going to request you to allow me to step back and make one fundamental point, which is that, interestingly, India today has reached a certain capacity and capability in being able to organize funding for the capital works in infrastructure. Why do I say it? Just add up the figures I'm telling you now. The budget provides 7.5 lakh crores. This is the union budget. Our 30 states and union territories together have a capacity to invest 6 lakh crores. Then you have public sector undertakings and extra budgetary resources of 2 lakh crores. Then you have NABFID, the National Bank for Financing Infrastructure and Development, capable this year and in the short term of funding 3 lakh crores by a 11-12 multiple of its equity base, which is what is desirable. And finally, you've got 4 lakh crores potential for private and domestic, private and international capital to come in on various infrastructure projects or public works. You add up all of this, you will come to a figure of 22 lakh crores. What is the significance of 22 lakh crores? It is the annual target of the National Infrastructure Pipeline. The NIP pipeline is 111 lakh crores for 5 years. So divide 111 by 5 and you will get 22. And look at the sources of funding. They are very, very practical. The budget has the capacity to do 7.5. States have that capacity, and all of that are rational. So funnily enough, 99% of discussions on infrastructure are about financing. Now, after 10-20 years of struggle as a nation, I can say with confidence that India today has the capability to fund 22 lakhs worth of infrastructure projects. We have sufficient mobilization of funds across different buckets to do so. So therefore, by definition, the needle of attention moves to two things. timely execution of projects, and creating an adequate pipeline of projects. Let me address the first one first. Execution of projects is a grim story. The report released in late December by the Ministry of Program Implementation and Statistics talks about 4.45 lakh crores of cost to the economy for account of delayed projects. You can download that from the ministry website. It lists many projects of 150 crores and above that are delayed anywhere from 3 years to 5 years to God knows 7 years. So chronic delays in project execution and commensurate cost increases continue to be a significant drag on our economy. Various fora have been created to tackle that. There is Prime Minister himself is very involved in a program called Pragati, which he reviews himself in the PMO. Then there is the project management group, which is now housed in the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. Ministry of Program Implementation tracks it. The Gati Shakti program will track it, etc., etc. So we have put together a system to hopefully start addressing the issue of chronic delays. I hope all these interventions will gradually see a lessening of the problem in the years. Now let me come to the other issue. And the life of an infrastructure project in terms of development is about, it goes through two cycles, development and construction. From the time an infrastructure project is conceived to the time it is ready for operations, normally takes 4 years. That is the pipeline. It's very simple. If you want to execute 100 rupees worth of a job this year, you require a pipeline of 4 times that, because it takes 4 years for a project. So if you have a pipeline of 400, you will be able to execute on the ground 100 out of that, right? So theoretically, since we just discussed the national infrastructure pipeline and said that it is targets 22 lakh crores of investment on the ground every year, I should multiply that by 4 and ask for an 88 lakh crore worth of project pipeline. Now, that possibly may be construed as an extreme view, but I think it's a rational view. Let us say, chalo, 88 lakh crores we don't need. We need at least 60 lakh crores of shovel-ready projects. Out of that, some portion will be executed in year 1, the year 2, year 3, and year 4. But I need that pipeline. So the million-dollar question I pose to you and all other analysts: do you think India has a project pipeline of 60 to 80 lakh crores? Or do we now need to shift our attention to creating a new generation of large infrastructure projects, like the socialist times when Damodar Valley Corporation, Bakra, Nangal, all of these were created, large hydro projects, coastal economic zones, new SEZs, major irrigation projects. We need a new generation of projects. My back of the envelope calculation shows that we do not have an immediate problem. My little bit of research on the number of projects that are being monitored and handled gives me the sense that India has today anywhere between about 35 to 40 lakh crores of project pipeline, which is good for us for the next 1 or 2 years. But unless we now have a resurgence of project creation, a new generation of large public works projects, we may have a peculiar situation that you will have more funding chasing lesser projects. Could anybody have imagined the situation? But this problem is gradually gathering traction among economic circles. And believe me, in the months ahead, you will see more and more of this discussed, which is that we need to create a next generation of a robust pipeline.
Next generation of projects, the kind of funding that we're looking at. So tell us, what is your reading when you look at the budget documents, when you look at the expenditure profile, when it comes to infrastructure projects? What is your reading of the projects for the next 1 year? And what if you were to, let's say, have a conversation a year from now, what is the picture you're getting?
Look, the picture I'm getting is as follows. Government in this budget has taken a lot of pains to make the playing field easier for private sector. Most important is the October 29th circular on the major reforms in public procurement. Please download that from the web and read it. It is to my mind, one of the most significant reforms since independence on public procurement. It dismantles the L1 Raj. It talks about payment to the private sector in 10 days. It talks about honoring arbitration awards. And wonder of wonders, it has put all of that in the GFR, the General Financial Rules of the Union of India, which means if you don't do it, you'll be hauled up by CDC, CAG. This has set the cat amongst the pigeons in the central government procuring agencies. Then, I am confident that government has understood that it has to reset the PPP frameworks. She's also announced that. I'm expecting an administrative announcement in the next month or so to set up a body. She has announced a major initiative to reorient municipal management, municipal administration, and municipal finance. She has talked about a high-level committee and set aside 250 crores to empower 5 academic institutions in 5 parts of the country to engage on municipal rejuvenation. That will set the stage for private sector to come in into municipal projects, urban projects, and set the stage, which I'm betting on. I will have this conversation with you in the next 2 years. There will be a tidal wave of market creation for municipal bonds. It is one of the largest markets of municipal bonds in the US, and India is going to replicate that. We're going to have municipal bonds. And she has set up, there will be an international arbitration center in the gift city in Ahmedabad. And there is the announcement of surety bonds from 1st April, which will replace bank guarantees, and surety bonds will be issued by the insurance sector. So you are bringing in the insurance sector through the back door into infrastructure financing, and you are providing a solution to the contentious issue the private sector facing, that we don't get bank guarantees from the commercial banking system when you need it. So all of these are going to provide a far more positive playing field for the private sector. And therefore, with the resetting of PPP frameworks, I am expecting a resurgence of private investment, which will then allow the government to do what you want them to do, to go into areas where private capital do not come in. But first, we need to get private capital to come into areas which are staring at you. So the combination of all these measures have actually found place in the budget document and the budget, but many people haven't been able to see through this. I have now understood this.
Very important and a very reassuring aspect that you mentioned. Finally, in conclusion, if I were to ask you, this targets that they have set for this year, what is your sense? Because they have to put in place a few things, and we have a limited time frame in which to conclude.
You have put this figure of 7.5 lakh crores in the union budget. Do you think you'll be able to spend 7.5 lakh crores? It's an open question. I mean, you may be able to do 6.5. You may be able to do 7. Sometimes you may be able to do more, like happened last year. Instead of 7.5, you may be doing 7.6. So I'm saying, look, there may be slippages here and there, but the broad thrust of what is being said to achieve, to my mind, will be achieved.
Thank you so much. And I think some of this gets reflected in this, and we actually get to see it. And, there'll be, lot to celebrate and feel happy about when we meet next time again and discuss this. And
sure,
we will have seeds of what you call the next generation of infrastructure projects that will be discussed, perhaps, which are talking of huge transformational, high budget, high capital intensive projects.
But thank you very much for this discussion and the interview.